The Spanish Way, Chapter 15. 2 Lenape warriors bound my hands using a leather strap. The strap was tied firmly around each wrist with 2 or less inches of slack in between. Clearly, the design would put me at a disadvantage if I chose to fight for my freedom. They didn't seem very concerned about me making that choice. They were very organized. My bonds were checked and tightened several times a day. They rotated guard shift and other responsibilities in groups of 2 whenever we stopped. We moved south at a very rapid pace for over 2 weeks. We camped each night from dark until sunrise. Only twice, the second and third day after I was captured, did we stop for longer than a brief break during the day. Each time, 1/2 of the dozen well-armed warriors left, and after an hour or 2 returned with another captive. The first time this happened, the other captive and I were given a firm speech by one of the warriors. Only some words were recognizable to me. It seemed best to keep silent, but neither of us knew what he was trying to communicate. Moments later, we began our march. The new captive began to speak quietly, asking for my name and village. With lightning quickness, we were both brutally beaten by several of our captors. As we lay bloodied and winded from savage blows, it was now clear the instructions had to do with us not speaking. The brief exchange had at least clarified that the new prisoner was also English. When the next captive came into camp and the same speech was given, we both held our index finger to our lips to save the new captive from suffering the beating we had received the previous day. Escape would be impossible. These lands were foreign, and the Lenape were clearly excellent trackers. A failed escape attempt would likely result in death. We clearly had some value to them, and killing us was not their intention. Having accepted these facts, I spent the long days of silent travel reflecting on the past and speculating about our destination. Feelings of betrayal and disappointment in friends and loved ones dominated these thoughts. But now, exhausted from days of travel and unsure of the dreadful fate that awaited for me in some mysterious destination, beliefs of wrongdoing were being called into question. Who was I? Did I ever accept blame for actions? Had I ever been truthful with myself, or was I too selfish and stubborn? Had I ever considered the danger I put my family and Abigail in with my actions and words in Roxbury? Why had I broken into the house in the clearing that night instead of knocking on the door the next morning and asking the family for what I needed? Hadn't I left my Wyandotte family that had taught me so much and cared for me as their own with little consideration for anyone but myself? Only now did I admit to myself that Jean-Luc and Claude had not betrayed me. They had acted out of self-preservation. Trying to save me likely would have cost them their own freedom or even their lives. Perhaps a feeling of self-pity brought on by uncertainty about the future contributed to the decision I made that day. A decision to promise God and myself that if He saw fit to bring me out of this ordeal alive, all my future decisions would always take into consideration the well-being of everyone involved. A vow made to see the world in each situation as the man I had become and not the boy from the past. After 2 weeks of travel southward, my fellow captives and I were in terrible condition. Limited food and constant movement were beginning to show on our haggard faces. The injuries sustained after speaking to the other prisoner days earlier were also contributing to our deteriorating condition. Despite the challenges, I became resolved to hide the pain and be as cooperative as possible. The other captives seemed to follow my lead while traveling and when camped. Without the luxury of words to support and encourage them, actions and determination would have to suffice. The other 2 captives most likely had less knowledge of the situation we were facing. There was a destination at the end of this long path, and I was certain the purpose was not our death, at least not immediately. Near the end of the third week of travel, shortly after crossing a shallow river, the other prisoner who had been beaten for speaking to me passed out and fell violently face first to the forest floor. Cautiously, I came to a stop. The other prisoner followed my lead and came to a halt as well. Rather than rush to the fallen man's aid, I held out my bound hands palms up and looked to our captors for permission to act. One of the two warriors we had come to recognize as the leaders gave me a quick nod and soft grunt of approval. Calmly, we proceeded to our fallen comrade's side. We were unable to revive him, but the feel of his soft breaths on my fingers and cheek confirmed he was alive. Wordlessly, we propped him up and attempted to raise the slackened body. Bound hands made it impossible to carry him no matter what position we tried. Out of frustration, one of the Lenape leaders drew a knife, a European knife, and advanced quickly toward us. As he approached, I closed my eyes, anticipating the end of our fallen companion's life. There was a brief tug and a moment's confusion before the realization that the leather that had bound my hands had been cut. Free of restraints, we carried the fallen man for the next 2 days with blind determination. Luckily, because all three of us likely would not have made it another day, we reached a place called San Luis de Enhaye at the end of the second day. Our exhaustion was so great that we collapsed to the ground immediately. We realized the destination of our long days of travel had been reached. It was a struggle to see through tear-streaked eyes as the world around seemed to waver from side to side despite my efforts to focus. The voices of the Lenape and what sounded like others speaking neither English nor French were audible. Despite never having heard the language before, I presumed that the other voices were speaking Spanish. Some of the words were similar to the French language. The men spoke so fast there was no chance of following the discussion. Recollection of the exchange was spotty in my memory, but before passing out completely, it appeared the Lenape Indians were provided with numerous supplies in trade for us, including guns.